So, colleagues and friends, hope you have your serum caffeine to a reasonable level now for this very important session, the most important session of the day. See, if I look at the number of participants who chose this session, it must be the most important session. So no doubt we go with the majority. I'm Stefan Tirstrup, I'm the Chief Medical Officer here, and I'm happy to be here together with a couple of colleagues to address this issue. Elena and I will be here virtually live. We got Esa Heinonen, who is Senior Advisor at the Finnish Medicines Agency, online. Esa has other commitments he had to deal with, so he couldn't be here today. And we also have Rosa online, if I remember right, who will be the rapporteur of this session and will report back to the group tomorrow. But before we kick off, I have a few slides. If you can put on the slides, Ivana or colleagues, just to set the scene. So what are we going to achieve with this without preempting the discussion? Of course, we want to understand your experience on shortages, in particular when it comes to biological medicines, including biosimilars, and also to discuss whether you believe that biosimilars and availability of biosimilars could be a solution to mitigate shortages of biological medicines. We will spend a little bit time here to give you an update on the work that has been done by the HMA working group on biosimilars, and that's Esa, who's the chair, and I'm the vice chair. Esa will do this presentation, and we'll talk a little bit about interchangeability of biosimilars. Elena will talk about the science about this, and I'll give a little bit of brief background about the statement on our website and how that has been perceived and what is going to happen moving into the future with this one. Before we kick off, we sent out a survey to all of you, and 26% of you were so kind to respond. I know from medical school having a response rate of 26 is not something you can base much science on, which I said to Ivana, but Ivana said, oh, no problem. Normally it's only 10% to respond. So this is actually quite nice, put it that way. So of course, take the outcome with a little bit a pinch of salt. This gives you, and I'm pretty sure the slide will be shared with you afterwards, so I won't go into all the details, but you can see the background here. Many payers amongst us here, patient and consumers, and healthcare professionals, basically making up 2/3 of those who were, or 3/4, of those who responded. You have mixed experiences with shortages of biologicals, and including biosimilars. And I know Per from IQVIA have the latest figures. I think, did you say 72?
77, I correct myself.
Okay, 77.
Shortages as of February 13th.
So
and that is in 25 countries in Europe. So it's 77 different presentations.
yeah. So yeah, maybe the mic on, Per, and repeat.
So so the rest can hear it too. There is 77 SKUs in shortage in Europe just now. It's 14 different molecules, and that represent 25 different countries. So it's actually quite low level.
Thank you, Per, and sorry for putting you on the spot, but I know you can answer these kind of questions because you and I have been in biosimilars for the past 10, 12 years, so that's nothing new here. So we also asked what do you perceive as reasons for the shortages, and most of you reported that yes, the medicines is actually available, but it's in shortage because there could be other reasons to having shortages. We thought to pick the brain on how comfortable you felt about biosimilars, and as you can see on a scale from 1 to 5, most of you, at least most of the 26% who responded, felt fairly or in the middle in confidentiality. And we have a double negation on the top of the other side here, that 84% of you have no reasons not to trust. That must mean you trust biosimilars interchangeability. And there are a lot of different inputs in why not to trust, or why having challenges with trusting interchangeability of biosimilars, coming to lack of studies in a particular therapeutic field, having doubts about whether biosimilars can be the same and whether it's actually the same technology. And I hope the presentation here will shed some light on some of those questions and clarify these issues. Could biosimilars be an alternative used to prevent shortages on biologicals? There is a lot of you who believe that this could be, but again, a lot of comments, many of them related to national issues linked to pricing and reimbursement, tendering, how things are dealt with in terms of information and so forth. So just to conclude, and I think on this slide is the concluding slide, that again, we don't know what 3/4 of you actually think about these questions, but I'm pretty sure you'll be given the opportunity when we come to the discussion to make your voice heard here in these issues. Definitely, biosimilars is still a hot topic, despite we are moving into 20 years of experience in Europe with biosimilars. Close to, I think the first one was licensed in 2004, and we had some scientific discussions in 2001. Before the legislation was in place, the CHMP challenged the system here, together with a company who submitted a marketing authorization application. But there's still a lot of things to do. Interchangeability is an issue, and that's why we will focus on this for most of the day. I think I will close here, and thank you all again for coming here. I hope we will have a fruitful discussion later on. I will pass on to Esa, who is, I can see now, available online. Esa, thanks for joining us from Finland, and you will give us a bit update on the status of the HMA working group of biosimilars. Many thanks.
Thanks a lot, Stefan, and I'm sorry for not being able to be there with you physically. So I will give you a brief background on the meeting and also what we have achieved so far, and then indeed our work plan. Next slide, please. So during the Finnish EU presidency, we organized this stakeholder meeting on biosimilars. And there was a clear consensus that the regulators have certainly done their job in the EU, being the global leader for regulation of biosimilars. But however, after the marketing authorization, things have not perhaps moved to the right direction. And therefore, there has been suspicion on biosimilars. And also the price competition has not really taken place that way that was hoped for. Because certainly when the prices can be lower, then also the availability of expensive biological medicines can be better to patients. And it was clear that the market penetration of biosimilars varied a lot between member states. And therefore also the availability of biological medicines was very much different between different countries. And unfortunately, this situation has not changed so much during the last 3 years. And so we as regulators looked at the mirror, what can we do? Besides regulatory work on guidelines, and we thought that at least providing objective information should be our task, and indeed that NCAs should take strong positions to increase trust on biosimilars. And therefore, next slide. We propose that one should organize a working group on this issue in order to enhance the uptake of biosimilars and indeed to increase the knowledge of biosimilars within the stakeholders. And such a pilot group was then organized, and we had several meetings. And typically the agendas were about sharing experiences, how one has been creating information at the national level, and what kind of tactics one has then had to enhance the uptake of biosimilars. Next one. And just one of the achievements we had these typically drafting groups for instance, writing articles. And one of the very important articles which will be referred later today is that one on the interchangeability of biosimilar monoclonal antibodies by Kurki and co-workers. We also looked at the websites of various NCEs to see how much there is information on biosimilars, and we could find out that in NCAs, that in 10 NCAs, actually the information on biosimilars was totally missing. And next one. And we also recognized an article by Barbier and co-workers who showed that besides not having enough information on biosimilars, they could show that in most of the agencies, even if they had some information on biosimilars, in most of the cases there was lacking information on interchangeability or switching. Can the biosimilar be switched with an originator, or even fewer information on automatic substitution at pharmacy level. Next one. And we also wrote an article on traceability. Traceability is important. That is, that the commercial name of the biological medicine has to be linked with an adverse event. And it was good to see that traceability of biologicals has been actually pretty good, about 95%. And this article was published in Clinical Pharmacology and Therapeutics. There was a slight decrease in traceability, so one has to be vigilant that traceability stays as a good level as it has been. So typically, we also look at the very good IQVIA reports, annual reports on the uptake of biosimilars in various countries throughout Europe, and certainly have discussed about the experiences on interchangeability at national level, for instance, on the automatic substitution. Next one. So in 2021, we then got the recognition as the official group of HMA, and we had these 13 agencies that were originally in the pilot group, and Sweden and France also joined. And certainly EMA has also been an important member all the time, both in during the pilot phase and during this official group. I've been chairing the pilot group and also continued chairing the later together with Stefan. And we are very grateful from the secretarial help from EMA. Next one. So the mission of the Biosimilar Working Group is really to increase the confidence of biosimilars, and the best way the regulators can do that is to provide information packages on biosimilars, so that we can enhance competition and lower the prices of biologicals, and therefore enhance the availability of biological products. And this has been actually happening during these 3 years, and we can see that in many countries, more and more patients can be treated with biologicals, thanks to biosimilars. And our task is really, as already mentioned during the pilot phase, it focuses post-marketing situation where national actions are important. For instance, whether automatic substitution is selected, or it is important to harmonize the messages what is appearing at the websites or NCAs. Next one. We also have an official goal in the multi-annual work plan or HMA and EMA. We are supposed to develop a toolkit that is available for the healthcare professionals and patients. We will also inform the development on the guidance and guidelines on the development biosimilars, and we will also help in training. And so this is the main framework for us to build the work plan. Next one, please. And certainly the development of the toolkit for healthcare professionals and patients is the most important and challenging task also for the group. And Ireland is leading this group, and certainly there is a lot of material already available at EMA. We can use a lot of articles, and also at national level we have good videos and so forth. And here you can see the timelines for such developments. So overall, during this year, we should have the draft packages ready, and we plan to then also consult EU-level patient organizations and also healthcare professional organizations to see what they think about our draft packages. Next one. Having noticed that there is a lacking of information at the websites or NCAs, we then created a brief information package or recommendation on information that should appear at the websites or NCAs. And this was endorsed at HMA at the plenary meeting last fall. And basically all the NCAs committed to use this information package recommendation, and we certainly will follow what the situation will be in the months to come. Next one. We also were aware that at that time EMA didn't have any information on interchangeability, and then the drafting group proposed a statement which then was approved by CHMP and finally by EMA, and we will hear more about this statement, the scientific background by Elena Wolfholz and Stefan. Next one. We also will keep HMA plenary informed about the possible regulatory changes for the guidelines. We are aware that at HMRA in UK, there is a recommendation that for development biosimilars, one might not necessarily need any more phase 3 studies comparing the originator and biosimilar, and therefore making the development less heavy, which hopefully then also would reflect in more affordable prices, and therefore also enhance the availability further of biologicals. And as in the pilot group, we are sharing and discussing about publications and sharing best practices beyond the typical responsibilities or regulators. We are discussing about tendering processes and pricing and so on. So we also have quite a lot of HTA experts also in the group. Next one. The group is not responsible for training as such. It's the responsibility of the ENWP, the Biosimilar Medicines Working Party at EMA, and then we wait from the NTC to inform us what the training needs are. There are already training packages available at the training center. We also want to stimulate the research carried on biosimilars and have active contacts with some academic groups, and then again share the results of such research with the HMA plenary. And in case HMA wants us to focus on some items, questions on biosimilars, we are ready then to dig in on those issues and also help to respond on questions on biosimilars at NCA level. Next one. So, thank you for listening, and I look forward to hearing your questions. Unfortunately, I have to leave in about 20 minutes, so I hope that perhaps one can take questions if you have direct questions on HMA Biosimilar Working Group now.
Thank you, Esa, and definitely, yes, let's open up for question now, knowing that you are rushing on to something equally important than this. We got a question over here. Bea, please.
Thank you. I'm Bear Oman, European Specialist Nurses, and I'm very pleased to see how the hard work on this working group on biosimilars. In the one of the slides explaining about the working plan, creating a guidance for healthcare professionals. I'm not sure if you are aware of this, but the European Specialist Nurses Organization created a guide in 2019, and we updated this in last year, especially for nurses. So I'm not sure if we are what the guidance is about, because we created this guide especially for nurses beside the one on the patients and the medical domain. So I would recommend just to have a good look at this, just to avoid the duplication, because when it comes to biosimilars and information, and I'm sure Per will also agree on this, that consistency in the information is very crucial. And in our guide, we have been using the material of the EMA, so we were very consistent in the guide, but we also included a lot of examples how to communicate this about this. It's not only the science domain. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the very good comment. And our aim is really to collect all the available information and not really to recreate the wheel. So thanks for this hint, and I'm sure if we can get your contact points, I'm sure Stefan will be active on this. We will take advantage of the package that you have already created. In the chatbot, there is also a question that what is the deadline for NCAs to establish web pages? We didn't dare to put a clear deadline for all the NCAs, because certainly it was the only information recommendation. But we will follow the situation, and our assumption is that our information package recommendation would be applied during this year by all the NCAs.
Thank you. Is there any further questions in the room? I don't see any hands. Online, Joanna? No questions there either. So, Esa, once again, thank you for taking the time to join us here today, and thank you for responding to the questions. We will definitely, I'll follow up with Bea on the details, and now we got a question online. So I will pause, and we will have a question.
Yes, we do have a question from Adrian. Perhaps we could invite him to say it orally? Adrian, would you like to raise it?
Thanks a lot. But Eza actually answered the question already, because I think he must have seen it online. So it was, what was the deadline for the NCAs? But he answered. So thank you very much, Eza. I appreciate it.
Excellent. So we solved that. So 1, 2, 3. Thank you, Esa, and have an onwards nice day. And we will continue here in Amsterdam. Thanks for joining us.
Yep, thanks a lot.
So the next on the scene is Elena Wolf-Holst. Elena comes from the Paul Ehrlich Institute, and Elena has been dealing with biosimilars in many years as well. And until very recently, you've been the chair of the biosimilars, the CHMB Biosimilars Working Party. And you're going to update us on the science behind the famous interchangeability statement.
Need to push this button? All right, wonderful. Okay. So yes, this is my task, and really to give you a bit of the science and the foundation, really the scientific foundation, but also the wealth of the information and experience that we have here in the EU at EMA with biosimilars. And that has led up to the statement, the interchangeability statement for biosimilars ultimately. So you see here again the evolution of the guideline framework. It all started, of course, with a law. I always say that because we really were the first, if not the only one really to have a law covering also biosimilars. And in this law already there's a statement in 10.4 upon the differences that are allowed between biosimilars and their originators. And of course, in the annex, it is specified that guidelines based on science need to be brought about that will then reconcile such differences and reduce any uncertainty that these two substances could be different. And you see in the bottom part, very important, the overarching guideline. And here the concept of a biosimilar being a version of the active substance is introduced. And this is a very important concept because it then lends really a lot of the science from ICHQ 5E, which of course deals with the requirements for manufacturing changes. And manufacturing changes are also based on the concept that for any biologic, really from one production cycle to another production cycle, you will always have a new version of the active substance. So in a way, each new batch that is being produced is a biosimilar of itself in some respect. And so these guidelines take on this concept and specify it. And you see there's also vast product-specific guidelines, and importantly, they are constantly updated. In Europe, we have a lot of experience. You see here currently, and this is really just from last week, 132 marketing authorization applications that have been reviewed. That is 15 are still under review, but 117 have been fully reviewed with 2 negative decisions. 25 have been applications have been withdrawn. This all these numbers also include duplicates, some duplicates, and withdrawal was primarily for duplicates being withdrawn, but there are 2 important cases that we're reviewing now for a new paper, also that were reviewed mainly for quality reasons. We have 90 positive opinions, that is 74 products on the market currently, and this is for the more complex markets. We have 7 different substances, 39 complex molecules, that is monoclonal antibodies and fusion proteins, that are on the market right now. and one EC decision on teriparatide is pending, 15 withdrawn, post-approval, which is primarily for patent reasons or other marketing reasons. Of course, everyone is fully aware of this blue triangle split in half on the left. It's the share of the requirements, the data requirements for approval of originators. On the right for biosimilars, you see the comparison really of quality studies is much more for the biosimilar, and this allows for reduced clinical work. How much is now again under discussion? How much clinical work do we really need if we have a solid quality base and very good quality comparability data? And very important here, this is a work from the group VISEA from 2016, the manufacturing changes according to risk. Number one, the observation that yes, there are manufacturing changes taking place. You see here, this is again 2016 for infliximab, 50 manufacturing changes took place at that time point. So this is a very common thing, and the least of which are high risk. High risk would be the change of a manufacturing site or the change of a cell line for production of the drug. Most of them are low or medium risk. So there's a vast amount of experience also here for complex drugs with regard to manufacturing changes. The terminology so far meaning before September of last year, was that switching is really the decision of the prescriber to exchange one medicine for another with the same therapeutic intent. And interchangeability really meaning the medical practice of changing one medicine for another that is expected to achieve the same clinical effect in a given clinical setting in any patient, but on the initiative of the prescriber. And this, of course, is the difference to substitution, where the prescriber is no longer involved. It's really on the level of the pharmacist. Automatic substitution, meaning that it is mandated by national law. What were the main studies that really drove our thinking with regard to acceptability of interchangeability? That was the Northwich study, the first, I would say, a study that looked at patients that had autoimmune disease, arthritis, or also gastrointestinal autoimmune disease. They were followed for 52 weeks, and one looked at deterioration of the disease status, which of course was the same in both groups, that is, they achieved the response, and the question was whether this response would remain or deteriorate. There was no difference between these two groups, and I think this was a very important result around Torquin's group in Norway. Then the Egality study followed with etanercept. It's a very a short half-life substance, and here three switches were observed in patients with psoriasis, and with these three switches, again, no difference were seen with regard to efficacy, safety, and also immunogenicity. The ADAccess study did something similar. It even added another switch, so a first treatment period where the two groups, adalimumab originator and the biosimilar candidate, were compared, and then there was a 4-time switch, and again efficacy, safety, and immunogenicity remained the same. We reviewed then also 58 clinical studies that were also less complex, that is somatropin, epofilgrastim, and here in a very large review done by EBBAS in 2012 for these smaller, less complicated molecules. Obviously here there were also no deviating results between the two after switches took place. The first a larger review than by the regulators, headed by Pekka Korki, our Finnish colleague, was on interchangeability, again, of EPO, filgrastim, also insulins, human growth hormone, and the first monoclonal approved, that was, of course, infliximab, Remsima, as a biosimilar. And here again, the switches were very efficient and possible, and there was no decline in efficacy. Here, a conclusion was that interchangeability was possible if the patient is clinically monitored and receives the necessary information and also training on administration of the new product. Very important also, the Danish colleagues, they have the DanBio registry, and they are very well published in the year 2017 and 19, where there was a switch, so first data on the performance with regard to certain parameters, efficacy parameters, before the switch and after the switch. Again, the disease activity remained the same. The strength of the DanBio registry is really all patients are encouraged to enter this registry, and apparently there's a big wealth of data on multiple switches, but I haven't found the publication yet. I understand they are working on it. And then 2021, again, regulators around Pekka Korki then looked at all the complex biosimilars that have been approved, that is antibodies and fusion proteins. And again, they were found to be highly similar and also interchangeable, which is in line with theoretical considerations with regard to immunogenicity. And the conclusion here was that systematic switch studies are not needed. Ironically, we do not require switch studies for our approval process. We decided that very early on. However, the companies typically do these switch studies because they are mandated by FDA. Therefore, since the data is submitted to us, we must assess them, and therefore they are in the EPAR. So this is why we could very nicely review all these approved products and publish the information freely. So here the conclusion was then that interchangeability of EU licensed biosimilars has been a demonstration, and that substitution could be tailored according to local circumstances, but that one should include also methods for traceability, the need for training of patients, and also the pharmacy personnel. Look at the switch protocol, the timing and the interval between switches, the different presentation forms that may need explanation, and also what the price differences may contribute in triggering such a substitution. I would like to end this little introduction with a German perspective. So we have here the Deutsche Arzneimittelkommission der Ärzte. So it's a physician's perspective. It's kind of a manual, health care professional manual. The first one was published 2017, so right after the EU published theirs, and it was updated in 2021. It has in it also conclusions that biosimilars approved in the EU may be considered equivalent with regard to therapy and efficacy, and safety can be administered to patients de novo and after switch. All biologics need proper pharmacovigilance monitoring, that's clear. It also recommends that the most economical treatment option should be chosen. And it sort of ends saying that individualized patient counseling is viewed as necessary to reduce the nocebo effect, this being identified as a major reason of possible lack of compliance, or also that there may be a heightened sense of a different safety profile. And therefore, automatic substitution in Germany currently is not supported by physicians. It is currently under review by BGA, and some discussion is taking place on this topic, but this is not in the remits of EU, and I think not really part of the discussions today. So it's really on interchangeability. So this was my introduction. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Elena. And I think we skip the questions or put them on hold until after the next speaker, and I'm pleased to give the word to myself. Without further ado. So I have a very brief presentation on the interchangeability statement as well, following on what Elena just explained. And I think this was already made clear by Elena, that the interchangeability, talking about whether products can be interchanged, is something that's within our remits based on science. But when it comes to doing this on a clinical basis or having reimbursement and pricing decision linked to this, so what we today call switching or substitution, this is something we leave for the national authorities, because then it becomes much more complex, because national pricing and reimbursement situations are different. There may also be doctors' association, nurses, and so forth, who come forward with statements about whether this can be done or not. So we keep it on interchangeability. And just to make clear, interchangeability in our world is either from the originator to the biosimilar, or the reverse, or between biosimilars who have the same reference product. So we are not talking about mixing apple and oranges just because they have the same indication. They need to have the same reference product, because otherwise they are not a different, otherwise they're not a similar version of an already approved product. Then they are a different version. Making things complicated for myself here. Switching is actually something doctors do, also between things that are definitely not biosimilar. This is an Italian study looking at some biosimilars, and definitely the filgrastim and the filgrastim biosimilar, but also pegfilgrastim and linograstim. And as you can see here, the prescriptions, they go back and forth and crisscross. So this is switching on a daily medical practice, taking the clinical outcome, the availability, pricing and reimbursement, and so forth into consideration. So switching can be much more complex than this, and has. So I think what I wanted to say is, when we talk about interchangeability in the biosimilar context, this is much narrow, much more controlled, and in a much more safe ground than what you see in this picture, also from a scientific perspective. Another issue, and now changing the subject a little bit, coming to more the national level, what we have seen now with almost 20 years experience of biosimilar is that some parts of Europe have a huge uptake of biologicals, and they have a big potential in terms of revenue savings by switching to biosimilars. But there are also other parts of Europe where patients do not to the same extent get treatment for their condition with biologicals. And there, in those countries, the benefit in economical terms of introducing biosimilars seems less. You could flip it around and say, in those countries, you could use biosimilar to expand access of biologicals. So we have a huge difference going from northwest, the richest part of Europe, to the southeast. And that's another challenge that we cannot deal with in this building, but definitely the HMA can try to deal with. This is all what Elena said here. We know that switching between non-biosimilar biologicals, so remind me, non-biosimilar biologicals, is very rarely associated with any adverse events. So moving even into the less safe grounds, switching between different biologicals is rarely a big issue. As said, EU-approved biosimilars are highly similar, so there we move into an even more safer space in doing so. There are a lot of safety data out there that in head-to-head clinical trials, there's no signs in change of efficacy and safety. And on top of that, and I think these numbers are a little bit outdated, but at least more than 1.3 million patient-year treatment experience in our pharmacovigilance database have not detected any difference in safety between reference product and the biosimilars approved. So we feel confident that interchangeability is something we can put our authority behind, and therefore, as Isa also explained, this statement on scientific rationale, which Elena has given, was published in September last year on our website. We know that some member states have been early adopters and have introduced this and have similar statements. And we also know that in some member states, the consequential practices of interchangeability, namely switching and substitution, has been taking place in different ways, depending on how this works out in the different healthcare systems. Following this, it was obviously that putting out a statement like this that could be seen as controversial or maybe require clarification, we received some questions. I would actually say we received surprisingly few questions. So we trawled both what we received and we trawled what the member state had received. And to start off with, we could come up with questions falling in 3 categories. These are the questions you have here. Mainly, can you switch more than once? And can you switch multiple times? What about more complex molecules? Is it safer to switch with small, simple molecules as compared to monoclonal antibodies or fusion proteins? The answer is no, there's no problem. And then, of course, whether the statement on our website has something to do with whether interchangeability and switching can take place in my country, and the answer is obviously no. So after putting these 3 Q&A document on our website, surprise, surprise, more question comes up. So this is about to, if not become a living document, then it's a continued story to be continued. No surprise. So we're actually currently working on an update of this Q&A, and we may also come up with a slight revision of the statement to clarify one thing that is not in there, and I think I can disclose that already. The importance of always consulting the prescribing information when prescribing, and that also counts for biosimilars. You cannot disregard the prescribing information just because it's a biosimilar. It should be common knowledge, but maybe it's important to stress. So one final thing before moving into the Q&A and our discussion is looking into the future for biosimilars, which may not look so bright as we would like, and maybe we have been too good at introducing biosimilars and pressuring the price too low, because if you look 5 years into the future and look at biologicals that would be available for biosimilar competition, only half of them are having products in pipeline development. So we may be in a situation in 5 years' time that we will have biologicals, including high-selling biologicals for oncology, for which there is no competition from biosimilars, and you can guess the rest in terms of economical consequences. So it could be a return to the pre-biosimilar area where biologicals continue to have the market in peace, so to speak, and no competition comes along. Let's see where it goes. I'll close here. And I think take some questions to Elena and me about the biosimilar interchangeability before we move into to the rest of the day. Who wants to open? Yeah, please, Rosa.
Okay, thank you for that presentation. I have a question I didn't understand very clearly, but it's the last slide. What are the reasons
if you could elaborate a little bit more, of course.
Yeah, it's difficult for me to answer on the exact reasons, but basically there is no company, or no, that's not right, but in half of those products that potentially could have biosimilar competition within the next 5 years, there are no company that have a biosimilar in their pipeline. And the most obvious reason is there is no business case. Because if there were a business case, I'm pretty sure there would be development. But Per knows the answer.
So IQVIA is the source of the slide. So this is the fact that there is no ongoing. And a big issue here is, let's call it sustainability. One is how much sales are there. And a lot of this is quite orphan drugs. So it's small volume. We all have loved to see that the 300,000 euro treatment goes down to 100,000 euros. But the second one is actually this gentleman much more responsible for, because the way the clinical trial is designed or is required is very costly. And some of these products has been estimated that to buy the comparator product would cost more than $100 million. So already in how you need to design the trial according to the existing rules, it becomes too expensive. And then I know when I speak with this gentleman off the record, he says, clinical trials, I'm not sure how really important it is. It is important, he always tells me, because it's how you build trust in our system. People trust clinical trials, but from a strict scientific point of view. But we have a long-term problem here, something that needs to be fixed one way or the other. And there might be many ways to fix it, to reduce the cost to bring a product to the market, because otherwise this equation doesn't really work. And I would almost like to, versus Esa's discussion before, he says the measure is biosimilar penetration. I would say there may be two measures I would have said, and one is how much the cost goes down due to competition. The problem is that a lot of the cost going down is in confidential rebates, but I can tell you it's a lot in real life. The other measure I think that's important, maybe better than biosimilar competition, is, let's call it the concentration on the market. Any market where there is only one player, or maybe a little more than one player on the market, actually get high prices long term. So what we want to see is markets where there is several players that compete with each other. That's the mechanism that we know is the most efficient to keep prices down here. So you've got two comments for one.
That's even rebate as well. Yeah, but and I think your answer, Per, that these are drugs for narrow or maybe even orphan diseases also adds another point. One thing is buying the reference product. The other thing is doing a clinical trial. So finding patients who want to or are eligible. Because there's another issue, and I don't think we need to go into that discussion. Doing clinical trials with biosimilars, there's really no equipoise for the patients. They get the same treatment that they would have gotten anyway. And some of them would rather like to volunteer to go into a trial with a new product that could potentially offer them a better treatment. So you can discuss, and I won't say my position here, not at least aloud, that to some extent it might not be so interesting for patients to volunteer to do clinical trials with biosimilars. I don't know. So more questions. Ivana, you got one online.
Yes, we do. We have Ioana Passati from EUI Ophthalmology. Perhaps we could give her the floor. And then we also have Adrian from Medicines for Europe.
Yes, bring them in. Ladies first.
This is Joanna here from the European Alliance for Vision Research and Ophthalmology. My question was, in the cases of automatic substitution at pharmacy level, that you've actually mentioned. Is the treating physician aware of the switch at some point? So is this a feedback back to the physician? Because if something doesn't work or goes wrong, how will he know, or he or she know? Thank you.
That's a good question. I think there could be 27 answers to that, because that will be how the system is built in the individual member states. I would say in some member states, there is a kind of, I can only speak for Denmark, there is a kind of feedback mechanism, because you can actually, as a prescribing physician, either sanction your prescription so there is no substitution taking place, or ask to be called if substitution is taking place. So there must be at least 27 answers to your question. I'm sorry. So it's a national issue how this is regulated, but it's of course a very valid point, because in some instances you might either not want to allow substitution, or you might just want to get informed that patients is going home with something else. So it's very different.
Thank you.
And Adriana?
Yeah, thanks for the excellent presentations. Very interesting data in there. Just following up on what Per from IQVIA said, would it not make sense to assess these barriers or hurdles to the lack of biosimilar development for some target reference molecules? Obviously, HMA and EMA cannot tackle everything, but there could be, one level of discussion with regulators, regulatory authorities on the regulatory challenges or hurdles, and a different discussion regarding market challenges or predictability hurdles with payers. And those two different dialogues, but brought together, could probably increase the number of biosimilar developments to those reference targets and bring that enhanced competition that Per was talking about. So I was just wondering if something like this could be envisaged for the future.
Yes, I think that's a very good proposal. I would say that there are some fora where this kind of discussion is taking place. So these are also multi-stakeholder meetings where we have this kind of dialogue since many years. I would say that there is some movement also by the regulators. Just think of possibilities of global development, the reference medicinal product being EU or US, integrated trial designs that are allowed now, where you would have not a separate PK and a separate phase 3 trial, but an integrated trial design, or the whole concept of a tailored pathway. So the invitation really to come for companies to come with their quality dossier and have a prospective discussion with regulators to what degree or what kind of clinical trials they would need. With the goal in mind, obviously, to have a reduction in the size of the clinical demands. So I think there is some progress in terms of recognizing that some flexibility from the regulators with regard to approvability is necessary. There are also some publications out in the air, but I would agree more discussion is necessary. Unfortunately, I think it is fair to say that the price argument is not an argument that regulators really are very susceptible to. So to say, well, it costs so much to do a clinical trial, this is not the best argument for regulators because they must have efficacy, safety, and immunogenicity in mind and really secure the standard that has been established by the originator. So other more scientific arguments are welcome and a very excellent quality dossier. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I didn't see there are 3 hands over here. Who was first? Should we let ladies go first? Yes.
Thank you. Eleanor mentioned adalimumab earlier, and I asked a couple of prescribers in 2 major London hospitals recently about what they thought about switching, and they're both consultants working in gastroenterology. and they happily use biosimilars all the time. But what they did say, they really do not approve of switching from one to another simply because of the pen devices which are used and the amount of time that they spend with patients which are non-compliant because they then have to retrain, and the cost of retraining just doesn't make it worthwhile. So I guess that's a something which presumably you do put down in your advice to consultants, is it?
Yeah, that's definitely a point, and a point we hear repeatedly, and an understandable point from a clinical perspective, because right to your point, you may add extra time in either avoiding medication errors or fixing non-compliance, or even having a nurse that needs to instruct patient every time you switch, which costs an extra burden to things. So I know that that's an issue, and also sometimes a drawback. It's complicated because the devices are patent protected in many cases. So unless we are talking about traditional IV injections, everything that comes in a pen is not easy to make work the same way. It's something we are aware of, and it's definitely a challenge for free interchangeability, if I may use that word. It's a good point. Then we had two gentlemen.
Thank you. Michael Amsch from GKV Spitzenverband. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for the publication of the interchangeability statement. There is, however, one thing from our experience from the German discussions we are missing, which is maybe perceived wrong. And it's the fact that it's always stressed that substitution is not within the remits of EU. While this is true, it's also true that switching is not within the remits of EU. So why is it there that the one thing we are missing is the fact that I found on your, Stefan's, first slide, the fact that interchangeability comprises both concepts, and it's up to the member state to decide which way to go. But that is not within the statement. The statement is only substitution is not within our remit. If you had put it with neither is in our remit, decide, and whatever you decide might or is safe, that would help us a lot.
Thanks for pointing that out. I was of the impression that we have weighed every word in our interchangeability carefully to avoid not talking about switching or substitution. I'm happy to review it again. I would then admit that when it comes to the Q&A document, the word switching is there because some of the questions we get is from member states saying, can I do this and that, and switching. And to be honest, it's right, switching and substitution is not in our remit. On the other hand, interchangeability, switching are linked. We are trying to disentangle two things that basically are at opposite ends of a string. So it's sometimes a little, but I'm happy to review the words once again. But of course, you can't have one without the other. I think we need to be realistic here, and we put out the interchangeability statement. But whatever member states and physicians decide to do with the possibility to interchange product, whether they turn it into switching or substitution or automatic substitution, that's their decision because it links to pricing and reimbursement. We can talk about the science between, sorry for using the words, switching one with the other, interchanging one with the other. So I'm happy to have a look at the wordings again. And then we had a question up there.
Thanks, very interesting discussion and really informative. I'm Dr. Amitabh Shorkar. I'm a public health scientist at the Geneva Graduate Institute. My question is that, can you please tell me that if there is a costing exercise done for clinical trial for a same event on the category of pharmaceutical product as well as biopharmaceutical or biosimilar product for the same event. And the second is that, say, if X entity comes up with 3 different products for the same event, which is a novel invention on the innovation dynamics or matrix, say pharmaceutical, biopharmaceutical, and biosimilar. So as a regulator, will it be considered as three different forms of patent? Then in terms of market dynamics, it's saturated. Or will it be like evergreening because of pharmaceutical products already there, so now they're biosimilar? Thanks.
I'm not 100% sure whether I understood your question, but let me try to answer what I believe I heard.
I may try further if you want.
Yeah, but first of all, any cost and prices for events is outside the scope of deciding on the benefit risk balance of a product. And basically, the marketing authorization for a product is based on benefit risk. So cost and prices and what we discussed before is outside that discussion. Of course, we know that this costs money to develop a product, but that's not something we consider when we approve the product. Neither do we consider that access to biosimilars, or for that matter, small molecule generics, is something to do with cost. Of course, we know these products, the only interest legislators have in allowing for these products to be authorized is savings. They do not add any therapeutic benefit. They add financial benefits for the society. So that's why our lawmakers made it possible. But we are to look at the benefit risk of those products and therefore reassure that a biosimilar is similar to its reference product as the generic is to a small molecule. Did I go down the right lane here? And then Ivana has something online, and then I noticed two hands over there.
Yes, we have also a comment from Julie Marshall Jamil. I don't know if we could give her it's a little bit about the same aspect about what is by default the definition of interchangeability. And perhaps just to remind, we also have some questions that we would like to put to the participants.
I know we have an agenda as well, but it seems to be important to us. Julia, the floor is yours.
Hi, good afternoon. I just wanted to comment on this definition and the gentleman from Switzerland that just raised the question on why are we talking about switching and why are we talking about substitution? I think there's a hierarchy that you implicitly referred to, the fact that you have to implement interchangeability at some point, and the default implementation is actually switching by the prescriber. The rest is adjustment as we go along. And I think this hierarchy in the current definition is not represented. We put the two options at the same level. But in reality, we know that the first practical aspect will be linked to the prescriber-led switching. So just a suggestion that hierarchy could be better reflected in the definition. Thanks.
Thank you, Julia, for that comment. I saw two hands out of the corner of my eye. Was it you, Miriam? So we get ladies first again, if it's okay, Francois.
Thank you. And I'd just like to mention that we already had a toolkit for biosimilars since 2017 in the Netherlands. Just reach out to me if you like to have that. I'm coming back to a comment by Mr. Heijnone, who said he wanted the BSWG working group to enhance and support research on biosimilars to support academic groups to do that. So I'm from an academic group as well. And I looked then at a very evidence that said by your colleague, switch studies are not needed. Immunogenicity concerns are unfounded. I fully agree with those statements. So what other research could Emma possibly think we need to do? Because for me, it's self-evident that they're interchangeable because you have set good standards.
I'm not so sure whether this is just scientific research or if it's behavioral research or market acceptance research. Does patient access increase? I mean, there are studies in Ireland, for example, that actually really show that biosimilars in the market will lead to greater patient access. But I'm just aware of the Irish study, so I'd love to see more of that in Europe. Yeah. So things like that. So it's not just the pure science. Yeah. Okay.
And François?
Yes. Elena, in the studies you presented, when you say safety, do you mean only serious or severe side effects, or did these studies also look into the non-serious, non-severe? As I understand that many times the patients feel some subtle differences with different products, sometimes some little discomfort, and they can't even explain the difference they feel. But if they have the choice between two, there are still aspects that might guide their preference for one biosimilar more than the others. So do we have also data on comparing non-serious, non-severe?
Yes, absolutely. So looking at serious, non-serious deaths, treatment emergent adverse events, grade 3 and more, which is another way of saying severe or serious. Yes, we've looked at all of that hypersensitivity reactions. I mean, what you would expect as an immunological response. And just, I mentioned to you the German report, the updated German report of the year 2021. There's, I think, 118 references, studies that are tabulated and that are very nicely analyzed, also with regard to the safety database. And of course, it's often descriptive. So it's not based like efficacy trials. You have certain, hypotheses, equivalence margins, ranges, and so on, intervals that you set prospectively. You don't have that for the safety data. So it's just descriptive. And it could be that in some studies, primarily smaller studies, you could find maybe 35% dropout rate, let's say, for patients that switch. But if you look a bit closer, then it seems from the studies that I have in mind now, at least, there is a very high nocebo effect. And this is also why in this German report, there's also several pages with communication guidelines, how you can reduce the nocebo effect, just how you ask them or how you inform about what a biosimilar really is, what this concept is, and how patients react. So I think this is the kind of research I think we may need a bit more. If you introduce it this way, what does it mean? If you introduce it differently, maybe there are ways that we could study this and really substantiate this scientifically, that this could make a difference. I'm convinced of that. Yeah.
So thank you all for all your questions. And sorry, last question, because otherwise Ivana will get mad with me.
It's even not question. Only comments, because first of all, thank you, Emma, for organizing this super interesting and actual meeting and discussion. But I represent IDF, International Diabetes Federation Europe region, and as represent as patient organization, in biosimilar in diabetes is big issue. It's a lot of discuss about this. Everywhere, every Congress input debate what's the best biosimilar, and many scientists want to show evidence that biosimilar same. But I don't know, but maybe we have reasons. As patient, many patients have resistance for biosimilar, and we must make feedback, and we make this IDF Europe position paper on biosimilar in the treatment of people with diabetes. I only want to introduce you. Then we have, this is of course not regular documents, but it's recommendation is our voice, and the healthcare professionals. It's a lot. You can look this in our site, but healthcare professionals should ensure that people with diabetes well management on an existing insulin are not changed to another insulin formulation, includes biosimilar, without good clinical reason and evidence of interchangeability. This is very important, and it's I'm not sure that we can find good way. It's big complex, but we must be very careful with this. It's very easy to say that it's interchangeability but people behind us people and safety. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you for that comment, and I think it underpins a lot of the things that we've been discussing, building trust, because one thing is that you can listen to Elena and others say these are similars, there's no problem here, but building that trust also in the patient community that it doesn't matter, so to speak, and also what we discussed over here, making studies that shows there can be different ways that you can introduce these products in order to make patients comfortable with switching. So thank you for making that comment. So, Joanna, we have something, now it's you who is going to work. This is a workshop, so it's not just us talking up here, So now it's over to you. We have some questions for discussion. And now we are going to put different on you on the spot. And it's so lucky that I can see on your lanyard whether you are industry or not. So it's just a matter of looking around. Biosimilars entering the various markets in the EU at very different times after marketing authorization, so with different speed. Can you come up with some good explanations why that is? You can most likely say market reasons, but maybe become a little bit more specific. Any one of you wants to jump into this? I know I can see Per is about to jump out of the seat, but I wanted to give the opportunity to others with a red lanyard before Per. Yeah, please.
The practice of medicine is different in different countries, and some are conservative and some are not. And I don't think you'll change that.
No, that's most likely. Is some of that conservatism also, and that could end up being a leading question, but anyway, is that somehow linked to the authorities' attitude toward information and so forth? No. It's doctors, simply. Yeah. I can say that I'm a doc. Yeah. Good point. Per, yeah, I can see you are about to. You can't wait, can't you?
No. I think it's, you hinted on it. I think it's actually the authorities' process that is the biggest factor here. And if you take your own Denmark or Norway, they always know well in advance when this is going to come. And they make a game plan as an authority, what they're going to do. I think that's one thing, that the bureaucrats know what they want to do. But I think that the key thing is that they build an alliance with opinion leaders, the doctors, the treating doctors here, and they make a plan together with them. So I think the countries that's fast is because the authorities has a plan. I'm not sure that they have a system that will be able to handle when there is many biosimilars each year. Maybe it's very manual, but I think it's the authorities that has a plan. That's my opinion.
No, Elena asked me, we don't need national approval, no, but they have the national implementation plan. So in Denmark, they have the tendering process. They have 2 different products in tender. They can roll it out, all these kind of things. So that's where it is.
It's more the tendering.
Yeah.
It's not the approval. It's the tendering.
Any other? Yeah, Ivana, please.
So we have comments online, and perhaps Adrian would like to make his comment, and we also have Gabrielle. So Adrian, over to you. Adrian?
Yes, thank you. I was just trying to unmute myself. Yeah, I would actually agree with Per. I think it goes beyond even what Per said, because many countries do Horizon planning for biosimilar medicines competition. So they plan, and they find out when the patent or whatever is going to expire and when the product is going to likely be launched. And they work to work with the physician community to bring that product to market as soon as possible. In other countries as well, you have an obligation to reopen procurement contracts when the first biosimilar medicine comes to the market. And so this forces, if you wish, immediately the product on the market. In other countries, you have tenders that are issued just before the biosimilar comes to market. So its access is actually delayed by maybe 6 months or 1 year deliberately for reasons you may think about, obviously bad reasons. So I think these are things. And the final reason is there can be also patent issues. So for example, with rituximab, the oncology product, there were significant delays in some Central and Eastern European countries around basically a very weak patent, which was invalidated in most of Europe. But because the procedures for invalidating the patent in those countries took so long, essentially the products were delayed in some Central and Eastern European countries for different reasons. So there are different reasons, but a lot of it has to do with the policies, not on the regulatory side, not on the medicines agency side, but on the procurement, the payer, the let's say IP court system side of things. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. That's a good point. And we had one more, Ivana.
Yes, I'm Gabriele Merkel from Switzerland, but representing European Society for Contraception and Reproductive Health. And what I see from my work as a clinician is, if you look at, for example, the steroid hormones, the individual metabolism can vary from woman to woman with 50%. And if in addition then I switch to certain, these are generics, not biosimilars, but this can significantly have an impact on the adverse event, not on the, for example, contraceptive effects. And I think the problems with the biosimilar as well is that whether they are more or less equal to the other preparations depends very much on how much individual metabolism is and how low it dosed, and it can nevertheless have an impact on adverse events, not clinical point we are looking at. And I think maybe you still need this other post-marketing studies with adverse events, or you inform the doctor. What I know is from my very long clinical experience when patients switched and I didn't know, and then they came back with certain adverse events.
Thank you for that comment. I think from working in national authority and in a country with a high degree of generic substitution, this is a well-known issue, but among very few patients who experience this, and it's mainly related to those products with a very narrow therapeutic index, and it's not more frequently than what you see from batch to batch. But it's a valid comment. Many thanks. Let's turn back to the industry perspective here. Unless we do not have further comments on this, I can see Ivana. Then otherwise I would move on. Sorry for rushing a bit.
I think we also have Julie Marchal who would like to comment, and then we can move on.
For sure, we give you the floor, yes.
No, I think Adrian covered my point, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Julie. So let's in the interest of time and getting answers to the questions, move on. And now we put another group of colleagues on the spot here, the healthcare professionals. Do you see concerns in switching the treatment from an originator to biosimilar or between biosimilars, and then sharing experiences wherever you come? So now I see a wood of hands here. We got a colleague at the back, yes?
Thanks. Dario Trapani, European Society for Medical Oncology. So I think the major probably concern that we may have sometimes in this switch is when we combine biological agents. And this is the case in oncology, of course. It's pretty common. And just scanning the horizon, this will be more common in the future because, of course, the drug development is moving in that direction. And when, of course, immunotherapy will become biosimilar, this is a major problem. So in the clinic, in fact, we test approve clinical trials with biosimilars are based on biosimilars tested alone, including when in clinic we use this as a combination. So in the clinical practice, when we had to combine with other agents, they are only available as originators. This is case of trastuzumab, pertuzumab, or biosimilars each others. Commonly, I think I found a major hesitation from the community. And I'm not sure, like in the statement, we addressed that, or if there is a specific language in which we can definitely enhance acceptability. In the literature, we don't really have data. So at the end, it's really about what we think. It's like an opinion because we can't really found on data.
But if I may disagree, there's a lot of quality data. And the problem being a medic myself is understanding quality is, like reading another language, another alphabet. And I think that's one of the challenges in explaining, because I remember in the early days of EPO, and the hematologists, we actually learned, the hematologists in Denmark, that they should look into the EPA. So they had read the EPA of the first EPO and said, but there's no phase 3 trial. No, there is no phase 3 trial, because can't we agree EPO works via one receptor? Yeah, we can agree on that. And see, here we have an assay, and so, that's the point. And I think this is a very important hurdle in explaining biosimilars to fellow physicians, that we need suddenly to speak another language that goes beyond clinical trials. Yeah. Thank you for that comment. And I saw half a hand somewhere over here as well. Yeah, it was you. Thank you, Margaret.
I will add what is said before. I'm from EULAR, from the European Alliance of Rheumatology, Associations in Rheumatology. Switching from one biologic to another, to a biosimilar, that is often done, as you already stated, after the Northwich study. But still, I think the point that was earlier made, that it takes a lot of work from nurses and from healthcare providers to explain everything, to have it done in a good way. That takes a lot of work.
I think that's a good point, and we know we got a lot of patient representatives here, so in a short second I will point at them to say, what can we do to bridge that balance, to bridge that gap? And I saw already hands, but I don't know, should we see ladies first again, Miriam, and then you, Bear?
I fully agree that it is not very practical to have all these different devices. Being a pharmacist, I know exactly what you mean. So it would be nice if you could standardize those. That would be great. But I wanted to respond to the other comment about using a biosimilar in combination with other agents. Working in oncology, we give all of our patients combination treatment. I don't think I have many patients that get just a single drug. And we also have growth factors that are biosimilars. We've been using them forever together with chemo and immunotherapy. And it is really, honestly, not an issue, not even with the trastuzumab, because we've been having biosimilars of those. So my experience is that you can switch or substitute. Both are perfect.
Just mentioning trastuzumab, and that's one of my favorite arguments when I talk to oncologists who have no problem using the subcutaneous formulation. And that was approved basically as a biosimilar, because they didn't do a full phase 3 trial for that one. But that's another story. That's a good one. But they have no problem as long as it's the originator. Then it's another game. Bear.
Well, thank you. I think, do you see concerns in switching in treatment from the original to the biosimilars and the other way around? I referred to this guide what we created, and I'm really also pleased to see Julie Marichal also present, and also Adrian, because we created this guide with huge support of Medicines for Europe. And what we did in this guide is just to learn how to communicate, how to build trust. And if a patient says no, then the professional says, okay, I accept it, but what's the yes part in your no? Or even the other way around. If the patient says, yes, of course, do it. Okay, you sound convinced, but there must be a no part. No part. We also did a survey on nurses, and we had a response rate of 800 nurses from Europe, where they said, what do you know about biosimilars? And also, how eager are you to learn about it? And that response was really very, very high. So if you're talking about the concerns, it's about taking time for the healthcare professionals to learn about biosimilars, but also how to communicate. So we also included in a lot of examples. So we're referring to Q&A. So in this guide, we have included a lot of Q&As from nurses to patients, but also between nurses. So that's also so the information is very crucial, and just take time for it. Take time, and facilitate those professionals in this. Just don't take it just for granted.
Thank you, Bear. That's a good point. Yeah, sorry, I got the sun in my eyes here.
No problem. Jorge Batista from PGU, representing community pharmacists. Yes, indeed, in community pharmacy, it's possible to dispense biosimilars in some countries. And also in some countries, it is possible to substitute between biosimilars. What we break down is that it's important to have early communication with the doctors, with the prescribers, and invest in good communication strategies, namely through electronic health records and shared electronic health records. So that's a good point. And also, just saying that if we started, if we see that the generics started 20 years ago, and currently over 90% of countries in the EU are able to do generic substitution at a community pharmacy. So we also hope that we can continue this work together in order to do so in the next countries. Just a small point that I think was before, when we presented the last slide on the forecast, my question is, should we be concerned on shortages on the next years? Because since this is a multi-stakeholder workshop on shortages, I think it's possibly a reason for concern. So thank you.
I deliberately put that in my slides because, yes, that's at least my conviction, and you are welcome to disagree, that having access to generics and biosimilars increases or lowers the likelihood of shortages. There are more products available, and looking into the future with the potential for half of very complex molecules for rare diseases, of course you make those therapeutic areas potentially more vulnerable for shortages. Yeah. Rosa.
Stefan, I'm Rosa. I'm a medical oncologist. I'm an healthcare professional, and I do not need phase 3 trials, okay, with respect to biosimilars, and I do not have personally any problem with respect to switching, given the science behind biosimilars, okay? So this is like an ANA meeting declaring, everything from the beginning. However, I think it's really I was really hit by the comment from Dario, which actually is very punctual. And the last thing I would like to have is like a diversion of discussion, in the sense that when the biosimilars at the beginning where we started, there was the discussion how similar is a biosimilar, blah blah blah, all these things, right? Now we are moving from part of the clinical community is raising issue about the combination of biological. So we are, diverting. It partly seems that we are maybe have accepted, some points, but then we are questioning other points. So I think that the solution, again, it's made clear in a very firm way that it's not a matter of answering this question for this specific point with clinical trials. Because again, this is a setting where clinical trials, phase 3 trials, are not the best way to address this question. So, and make it clear that all the discussion about combination are actually addressed by other amount of evidence, which is can be a preclinical evidence and so on. So I think that in terms of discussion and raising awareness, again, and I'm actually wondering why we still need to raise all this awareness after 20 years that we are discussing exactly this point. So I still really, I think we should ask question ourselves. But if we really want to raise awareness, we really need to go back to the preclinical side of the story. And when I say preclinical, I mean the quality side of the story and so on, and try to understand better how this works. Because otherwise we will have the first point and then we say, okay, we give these clinical trials, and then there will be another question, clinical trials and so on. And with respect to biosimilars, the way of looking at the drug development is a bit different, and this is the beauty of biosimilars. So I think that we really need to remark, I don't want to sound harsh, but I think that there is a certain time limit to this time of question, in the sense that we really need to accept that we need to change our angle of observation and the type of data that we need to trust this drug, if we still really need to proof of evidence for trusting them.
Do I understand you correctly that you're saying that we should educate physicians more in understanding preclinical data, the physical, chemical, analytical, biological, functional data?
I think if I, have to envisage any type of education system, I mean, this is not like, if you have a child, again, just to make an example and, to convince them, you give what, it is understood. I mean, you can also educate the child to understand that, there are other aspects that need to be considered. So in this case, yes, it's a matter of going back to the analytical data and so on. So maybe when possibly, if we need to refine the discussion, when we say, like, the totality of evidence, okay, which is something very nice because it's summarized very well, maybe we need to be more specific on which is this totality of evidence, right? It means, quality data and so on. And this is not just a responsibility, of course, it's up to the experts, but it's also, it's a 50% responsibility. It's up to all of us to understand what we are talking about, okay? So I do not know if maybe we went we were too quick in discussing like the totality of the evidence. So we need to be maybe more specific. I do not know, or I will steer the discussion in that direction.
Thank you, Rosa, for declaring your full trust in biosimilars, but still pointing out that there are areas where we could move on and maybe explain more why these products are similar and how we come to that conclusion. If there's no other points up, Ivana, do we have one more? You got one online as well? Yeah, please.
Yes, we have some examples shared by Ioana Pesalti in the area of ophthalmology. I don't know if Ioana would like to mention. And we have a question about in how many cases does the same marketing authorization holder is the holder of the biosimilar and the biological? So I don't know if this is something we want to put here.
I'm not sure I can answer the last question. Do you have that on top of your head?
I don't have a number here, but I think that the majority, actually have both. They would have originator and biosimilars. There are exceptions. Roche and AbbVie come to my mind. They are purely originator, and there may be some that are only biosimilars, but I think many, actually quite many. I don't know exact numbers. have both. Yeah.
And some examples from ophthalmology, do you got them in writing and how, Ivana? I didn't catch that.
Well, I think this was reported by the American Ophthalmology Society, and someone just actually pointed out, Maria Grazia Vandri, she's just pointed out that this is an off-label use. I would like to add that the ones that I've put on the chat, which is Pfizer, the Zirabev, I don't know whether this is also in the EU. The actual industry have actually not condoned this, but this is a push from the insurances that they are using the shortages of the originator to actually push the biosimilar. So it's a slightly different dynamic there. But I think the example is there, and I think quite rightly was pointed out, it's an off-label use, but nevertheless it is a point of concern. And the other concerns that the ophthalmology has is that they don't have consistency on the doses. So if they want to switch from one product to another, they're never sure what is the right dose so that they can have the same effect. And I think that is a more kind of a clinical setting reality. And that may go also on the training needs for the healthcare professionals. Thank you.
May I say something to that? I think a dose is not the issue because the posology must be the same. That's very clear, also in the approval process. You probably mean strength.
Well, this came from. Yeah, sorry. This actually came from my healthcare professionals. So they use the word dose, and it's actually quite interesting that if you're thinking that there is the wrong reference, that's actually pointing out more to the need of educating them exactly on the point that you're saying, that there may be a misunderstanding of what what they understood and what is actually the evidence and the regulatory authorization.
Yeah, it's very clear. The regulatory authorization is for exactly the same posology. That is the same dose. So if it's whatever 200 milligrams every 3 weeks, then this is exactly what must be given. But if a strength is, let's say, 100 milligrams per milliliter, then you give 2 milliliters. And if it's 200 milligrams per milliliter, you give 1 milliliter. So it may be a different strength. That may be allowed, certainly also then after approval, because it says already in the overarching guideline that once approved, the biosimilar may have a life cycle on its own. This is different from the United States. FDA is different that way. For example, we also have products that are approved as the originator being IV, and then with regard to life cycle management, they add a subcutaneous route that's allowed in Europe. So all these things could lead to some confusion, but in terms of the posology, that must be the same.
Okay, thank you.
Which remind me of what I said in my presentation. Reading the product information when prescribing is actually a good idea. It's actually recommended, but that being said, once again, Ivana, more on this, or are we moving on to, you're nodding? Sorry, I gave you two questions. So
Sorry.
It's
so I start with the fact that we still have a hand raised from Gabriela Merki, and also a follow-up from our colleague Maria Grazia, that the question about the marketing authorization holders was linked on the potential for shortages. So that was the behind the question.
So my question was related to the last two comments. I mean, of course, the dosage is the same, but the plasma levels can significantly differ. And as far as I know, they must be in the range within 30% of the original product. And so we can have a lot of other effects if we just switch the product from one to another.
not within the same patient.
Yes.
No.
within the same patient?
Let me iterate once again. The switch between an originator and a biosimilar will not create more change than switching from one batch to another batch with the same product. And that holds for small molecule generics as well.
I have only made very few studies. I'm in research as well, but women can have different plasma levels. And as I understood, this is also allowed within the same patient with biosimilar and the original product. But maybe I'm wrong.
It could be then that this was not standardized, that in your comparison between the biosimilar and the originator, you did not always look at the same time in the cycle of a woman. The pharmacokinetic behavior really is within a standard range, and that is 80 to 125%. And this is completely standard range of a confidence interval that you look at, and it is really mandated that must be the same. So it's a solid block of the comparability exercise, and this criterion must be met by all approved drugs.
But if you have, say, 80 to 120%, this is a difference of 40%.
No, now it gets complicated because it's not just 80 to 125. It's the 90% confidence interval on the difference that has to be between 90 and 125. There's a complete guideline on bioequivalence. So it's not just the plasma level that may, it's the standard deviation on the plasma level that must be within this range, or actually the 90% confidence interval of the, and so forth. So it's not, and I hear what you say. I hear this for the past 25 years for generics as well. It's not 30% difference in plasma level. End of story. We will move on to another set of questions. Now to the patients. And I already had a question, from before to the patients, but I'm pretty sure you remember that because I forgot it. Do you have concerns on use of biosimilars and including switching? And do you have received sufficient information? I guess I can, where we are going. And what have been the most important source of this information, if you have received it, of course? Who would like to kick off here and give me some feedback? François?
So to the second question, I will not answer directly, but maybe suggest that this question is an excellent case for patient preferences elicitation studies. I think it would be excellent during the development and evaluation if we could ask a panel of patients using discrete choice experiments and comparing different characteristics of the biological and the biosimilar in terms of ease of use or how do they feel, etc. If at the end their preference are 50-50, that would mean that for this panel of patients, they are totally interchangeable. And if this is mentioned in the package leaflet, then other patients will have the feedback from patients, and then that may help them decide that, okay, they're equivalent or interchangeable, and it's not because we want to make savings on their shoulders that this one is proposed more than this other one. So that would be my first comment. Second, a concern on the use of biosimilars, and there were cases, particularly in situations of shortages, with a snowball effect, a first product in short supply and the demand transferred to a second product with, I think, a problem which is specific to biologicals is the lag time between the decision to increase production and the moment the production is increased, with risk for the manufacturers because often they don't know how long the shortage will last for. But there were situations where patients, in fact, were forced to switch to an alternative product, and some were doing better with the second, whatever it was, but then in many cases are forced to go back to the first once the shortage is over, and that's when we also have difficult situations.
Two very excellent points. Thank you, Francois. I like the patient preference experiments, and as you said, if it ends up being equal to flipping the coin, what you prefer, and that could be quite interesting and relevant information to have in the patient information. And you're right, force switching is not something we like, but of course shortages can lead to this. But that could actually also add to a negative connotation about biosimilars, because being forced to take something you don't feel comfortable about, and then real or not experience something, and then being forced back, and I can imagine a lot of things. Marco.
Thank you very much for the floor. It's now easy to go a little bit out of the box because Francois was very on to the point. So I just wanted to make 3 points. One is trust, second one is communication, and third is time. So the last one, I don't think we could change easily, but there is a high burden on healthcare professionals in European Union. And we are experienced that from the patient side, because I was reading some data on the World Bank, and funny story. So a doctor could offer 30 minutes to a patient, and then he waited 7 hours and a half for another patient. But this was in Tanzania. And for example, in China, he had only 3 minutes for a patient. So in Europe, we are somewhere in between. And this lowers the amount of trust a patient has in his doctor, because you don't feel that you are there. There are a lot of people waiting. And this is connected to communication. So communication between doctor is something that needs to be built on trust, and the information should come from different sources, the same information. So it should come from doctor, who has like limited amount of time, and the same information should be available from nurse that is out there and has maybe like few minutes more to explain. And the third party would be like patient association, who should be very briefed on the same information. So it would be very great to build up trust with patients in order to offer them the same information from different sources. And I think that would be like something that it's closely linked to using biosimilars. Thank you.
Many thanks. I think we heard the time being mentioned in, time to explain, time to it's an important issue, also linked to resources, of course. I have Angelo first, and then Yalcin.
Thank you. I'm Loris Brunetta, representing Thalassemia International Federation. And thank you for the very interesting discussion about the use of biosimilars. It is something that our patients, biological medicines, we are using a lot in the last years for tackling the complication of hemoglobinopathies in general. So I'm here to learn more about, actually, I've experienced 3 years at the Committee for Orphan Medicinal Products, so I'm quite trained about the biological and biosimilars. But what is important for me is to understand how to set a good training for the patients, because Marco raised a very important problems. There is no communication between doctors and patients, so it's difficult for a patient to understand. Even attending a clinical trials is something that is difficult, because the patient is not aware entirely about the rights to be informed and to know and to withdraw eventually. And so it's important for a huge federation, a well-structured federation as TIF, to train the patients in this matter. And I think that the main topic here is information to patients that is not delivered very well from the clinicians, from my side. Thank you.
May I ask a question? We've also, from the EMA side, developed a patient video. I mean, do these tools help?
Yeah, I think that all the tools can help patients' awareness and understanding in the matter. I think that is a duty of the patient's organization to use these tools that are available and to convey it in a sort of training courses for the patients specific, because from my experience, the patients learn much more listening other patients speaking rather than doctors or clinicians that sometimes are too much technical and not very well trained to talk with the patients.
Thank you. Thanks for the clarification. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. I represent Global Skin, International Alliance of Dermatology Patient Organizations. First of all, I completely agree with previous remarks on trust and information. Second, for patients, the first question is not trust in biosimilars, but in trust in doctors. We usually patients don't choose drugs, but they choose healthcare professionals, but they choose their doctors. And the training of doctors so that they are updated in new technologies is a huge issue in dermatology. And the second issue for dermatology patients especially is the financial burden. For example, for psoriasis patients, the financial burden can go up to several thousand euros per year. Because it is not only the treatment, they can be cost for outfit, cost for other things, and so on and so forth. So yes, the cost would have serious implications in the choice of a treatment. And also we know that in many European countries, biological drugs, they are not reimbursed by the system. And if the biosimilars, they are less costly than the previous ones, of course, many patients would give preference to it. But the information should come from the doctors, and yeah, there must be two-sided information flow between patients and the doctors. Thank you.
Many thanks. That's a good point, that patients don't pick the drugs, but they pick the doctor instead. So we have to go that way as well. I had a comment on the back there, please.
Thank you very much. I'm coming from EHP, European Association of Hospital Pharmacists. And first of all, I would like to thank you for this interesting workshop, but mostly for this interesting intervention during the discussion. And yes, the trust, I think that it's the mainly work. Trust between healthcare professionals, trust from patients to healthcare professionals. So please don't forget that pharmacists, even if they are in a hospital area or even if they are in the community, can play a very crucial role, because we can say that pharmacists are a hub of information. They can advise regarding the safety, regarding the evidence-based. So yes, we have to train patients, but also I believe that we have to train healthcare professionals, doctors and pharmacists, and of course nurses, how to develop the products, because we speaking about going from the reference products to the biosimilar, but we also sometimes go from the biosimilar to the reference product. So in my opinion, because I'm in the hospital line for more than 35 years, it's not the way that you go, but it's to know that this way is going in the right way. So I think that things can be easier if we have a good knowledge and a very good communication. Thank you.
Thank you for that as well. Now, do you have something online, Ivana? No, we emptied out. We simply tired out the audience here. I understand why, yeah. So...
Only one word. I fully agree with last speaker about pharmacists. I bring to our IDF because I'm pharmacist and I understand how it's important. It's a lot of studies show how pharmacists can improve outcomes in different areas. In this case, it's very good that we all the time, it's like pharmacists exclude from this communication, only patient and doctor, but pharmacists can be super role in this area. Thank you.
we need to remember everybody in the healthcare system plays a role here for sure. Yeah, thank you. So, including pharmacists. Let's move on to a question here for those who deals with health technology assessment and payers. What is needed here is, let me be a little bit provocative, is it just the price, or do you need more? Do you need the famous phase 3 trials, head-to-head comparison, endpoints, 6 months, 5,000 patients, or what are you looking for?
Very simply put, we are looking for the message and for the understanding of the message that biosimilars and generics are the same in similarity to the reference period, just the way of proving this similarity is different because the products are different, so that there is no need for treating those drugs differently in principle, leaving aside all those problems that are attached with devices and all the things that are around, so just focused on the active substance. And that's something, if this trust could be built within doctors and then patients, then we would have a lot of things to, well, which would function better, because since we're talking about shortages here, one thing that helps us avoiding shortages reaching the patient is that we are allowed to substitute drugs one to another as long as they're the same active substance. And the more separated the markets is, the more the risk is that the shortage really hits the patient.
Very well said. Pierre is about to explode again, I can see.
No,
Pierre.
but I've listened on what you have said or what people have said before. What you actually need to this guys who's taking a decision is how compatible the device is with what people have as experience before. I don't know that anyone have done something like that, but you need to have a methodology to tell how easy it switch from device A to device B and what type of retraining and so on it is. Brand new area for the academic to do some research on that, but that would help to guide people.
But I think we do have that. We have human factor studies, we have usability studies, and they're mandated often. So,
Okay, I didn't know. But I think that is one of the remaining differences that's left.
And this is a kind of a conundrum, because when I talk to companies, every company tells me that their device is the simplest ever, and the patient can't ever use it wrong. And if I then say, well, then it's no problem if you change the device from one to another, then I say, well, this is complicated because this might confuse the patients. So the two messages don't fit.
Let me try with a compromise. I'm not whether I'm succeed. Of course, you're all right, but what I may hear what you say, Pierre, you're looking for the comparative user studies to tell me whether device A is more difficult to use than B and C and so forth.
I'm as much looking for that if you have been on device A and yet now you get to device B, how simple is that for the patient? Because that's
so switching studies for
it's
devices.
a switching study on devices that I really would like to see.
RCT, randomized control trial. No, just to say that probably RCT. Is there any RCT done so far? Randomized control trial on this?
Yeah, and of course, the randomized controlled trials that we see with biosimilars now, sometimes they are done with the devices, but the problem is that they sometimes are done in early development. So there the device, the final device that enters the market was not ready yet. So they're done with a classical subcutaneous or intravenous injection. And then when it get markets, then they come forward with some fancy device. So it's not always, so it have to be quite late stage, which of course will add to the development costs of biosimilars, but that's another story. Yeah, but good point. I like the comparability and your point that they are all so easy to use, but apparently not when you switch from one to the other. Yeah. Other comments here on the payers health technology assessment.
Sorry, I mean, I actually have got my basic training in epidemiology. So I'm just thinking, thanks to all of enter this rich conversation. So, i- is there any cohort analysis for the same treatment protocol using pharmaceutical or biopharmaceutical as well as biosimilar? So that could actually be a set of guideline or standardization of this HTA evaluation, if there is. That's what.
So a cohort study analyzing the different devices that have been used?
For the same treatment protocol,
Mhm.
using two different devices and their process evaluation. So that might actually give the edge to go for department product specific HTA or in particular.
Yeah, very good idea. I can only say from my experience that sometimes you find that protocol is set up, or a certain portion of that, like later entry patients, that then they've used that device and then that is being analyzed. But sometimes it's not the case, and it's after the approval of the drug that they now introduce a different device. And then often we do not request those studies with the product. So
That's a protocol. I mean,
So that's an invitation to some research, Miriam.
you don't need the expensive product necessarily. You could take any solution. I mean,
I don't understand why we allow all those different devices, to be honest. Because if you look, Per was talking about it, I see him with his charging device. So I think there are 3 connections to charge your telephone. That's already too many, maybe. But why really do we allow 30 different devices for people to subcutaneously inject themselves? I don't, yeah. Sorry.
I hear the word incremental innovation being mentioned up here. No, but you're right. Of course, now Margrethe Vestager have cut down only to 1 charging plug for our iPhones, you know. So maybe it's something for the European Commission. No, I'm just joking. I think that's really a point well taken, but I think it's a challenge and it's something to do with innovation moving forward, improvements to some extent. Sometimes it's a matter of, the color looking a little bit, but it's devices, it's the free market, of course, but yeah. Thank you. I look at Ivana, although it's difficult with the sun again, but I can see there are no more questions online, comments online. So now that brought us to the end of this fruitful discussion. I can also see we have been running a little bit over time. Sorry for that, but I hope you enjoyed, or whatever you will say, found this discussion and presentations interesting. I thank you all for all the nice feedback. I'm pretty sure Rosa have picked up a lot of things. I picked up things, and just very quickly to summarize, I think I heard most of you say trust, communication / information, time, which is a very complex thing to solve, time, because that's linked to resources in the healthcare system and so forth. Thinking a lot about also where we could improve our communication to prescribers around how these products are approved, the totality of evidence, what do we mean, why are clinical trials potentially not the answer to everything here? Thank you. It's sunset now. We are. It's not the sunset clause that we are running into, but that's something completely different. No, and then I also hear that different therapeutic areas might have different challenges in dealing with biosimilars. Some areas are straightforward, maybe only 1 product. Other very complex therapeutic areas, and we might need to explain more there. We discussed the issue why there is differences across Europe in speed of access. Many of this is linked to market mechanisms, but also how good not only companies are in planning the market, but actually also how good member states are at preparing and talking to companies and say, come to us, we are ready, we can set up, you can go into a tender process or whatever we do. So it's also something that can be done there. And finally, I think the last discussion we had here about payers and the discussion about devices and what could be done there too, because that seems also from the start of the discussions to be a recurring issue, a stumbling block, and say, well, we are basically okay with these biosimilars, but how do we introduce them because they come in different devices, and then it's no longer the biosimilar as such that's the hurdle to implement, but it's the implementation because they are put in devices that's then are the hurdle. So I think we can take a lot of good ideas here. I also, to the message about interchangeability, having, there may be a need to tweak some words, even though it's a little bit of semantic discussion. But I also heard you say for payers, it's important to be reassured that although we do not regard biosimilars as generics due to different legal issues, the way they are to be regarded in terms of implementing them are the same. I think that message, and I hope the interchangeability message is helping on that part of it to say, well, they are interchangeable. We don't want to mix it up with generics because that's we cannot do that, and it would create a wrong message. So by that, I'm surprised that you are all, well, at least sitting, but I don't know where standing might be another problem. But tomorrow you will have to report back here in this room at, I'm just checking my notes here, at 900 hours we will kick off. So a few minutes before. I thank you for being here. Thank you for your contributions, good discussions. I wish you a good evening here in Amsterdam, and see you fresh again tomorrow. Thank you.